All right, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know what Jim told you well, I do know what Jim told you last week, but do not be afraid. I do have a plan for the summer, even though he may be worried about that. You guys are just gonna have to trust me,
Okay, we will.
especially you, Jim. You need to
I will.
be more trusting and
As long as I can see you, I will trust you.
all right. So there is a plan. I'm just waiting on one or two more people to agree to it. But I wanted to start us off this morning with just some time of recap. And I guess Jim could get up here and start telling his lesson from last week. But what were some of the things we talked about last week when I was not here? And if you guys don't want to share, just stare at me blankly. I do know what you were supposed to talk about, so, and I know what you did talk about. So
Joshua and can't remember the other book. That it sounded like we were going to go into the Old Testament and it's going to be broad.
yeah,
But I just thought, well, maybe a deep study.
sure.
But also too, I get concerned because there's so much stuff that is so bad. I need to be prompt with the good spirit of God to from the New Testament to the Old Testament.
Sure.
Give me hope and put me in a better focus.
All right. So hope coming out of the Old Testament. What else? What else was talked about last week?
Joshua followed Moses and spies going into the land.
Yep. So Joshua was one of the spies. What was so important about this land?
Promised land.
Yeah. And how far back was it promised to the people of Israel?
Abraham.
It was back to Abraham, right. Now, this morning we'll actually go ahead and get started in the book of Joshua. So we'll be looking at the first two chapters of Joshua 1 and 2. But I want to start off with this question. What does it mean to know God? And you guys can answer, or this could be a rhetorical question and none of y'all answer, and that's fine. But what does it mean to know God in your estimation?
Means everything.
Yeah.
Means intimacy, understanding that you have the Holy Spirit, that He gave you a gift of the Holy Spirit, and that you have a responsibility to help others to love God, know God.
Sure.
Staring at the purpose in life.
I always think about relationship.
Purpose, relationship, intimacy. What else are kind of signs or things that make us think someone knows God?
Well, the light
Yeah,
and darkness,
sure.
and what grows without our ability.
Sure.
And healing, that we pray or doctors try to help someone and people heal. And they get well. The impossible, where we have the impossible and we wait for God and God answers prayer.
Sure.
Well, Joshua had followed in Moses' footsteps from the beginning of the Exodus. And so he watched Moses and learned so much about God. I think our relationships with other people help us to know God.
Sure.
And it certainly did Joshua,
Yeah.
as he watched Moses do what Moses did.
Yeah, I'm sure in this class, maybe I am the outlier now this quarter, but I'm sure all of you can think of people that looked up to you and saw your relationship with God, and that was the basis for them coming to know who God is. This morning, the main idea, I guess, is going to come out of Joshua chapter 2, and it's the story of Rahab and the spies. We have probably heard several lessons or sermons relating Rahab, and there's always Rahab, she's in the line of Jesus, and why is she in the line of Jesus? And we need to look back and talk about this, and I think all of those lessons are good. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying we need to go talk to Dale about all those times he talked about Rahab. What I'm saying is at least for this quarter, I want us to take a different look at the story of Rahab. Because this week's lesson is titled, "The Lord Your God, He is God," which seems kind of weird. Well, yeah, the Lord, our God, yeah, He is God. Thank you for repeating the obvious. But that line comes from a confession of the faith of Rahab. And it's one of those moments where she is a foreigner. And so she's not saying He's one of the gods. She's saying the Lord your God, the God of the Israelites, He is the God. There is no one above Him. There's no one like Him. And it's one of those things that's just interesting to think Rahab knows who God is. I think a little bit better than some of the Israelites know who God is. Because if Rahab was there and making this confession of faith back in Numbers, I'm sure the Israelites wouldn't be wandering in the desert for 40 years before they ever get into the land of Canaan. And so this morning, I want us to spend some time talking about those things. But we'll start in chapter 1. And hopefully this can give us a little bit more information about knowing God in our lives. So could I get a volunteer to read Joshua 1, verses 1 through 9?
After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord had said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them. To the Israelites, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert of Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, and the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea to the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Is that it about far enough?
Yes. Was that the first 9? No?
Oh, be strong and be very courageous, and be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful.
All right. Thank you. So what stood out to you guys in this section before I start sharing my thoughts? If nothing stood out, I can just keep rambling. But I'm sure some of the talkers in this class would like to talk. So would anyone like to share their thoughts coming out of these first 9 verses?
He says it's your land, take it.
Yeah.
I will be with you no matter what.
Be strong, be courageous.
Yeah?
You took quite of a man to take responsibility, to take the position of Moses.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, and that's why he tells him to be courageous. That's very, very hard. I think very committed,
Sure.
to take that lead, and I think that he knew God enough that he had no choice,
Sure.
that he had to lead.
Well, I think it's also one of those, by this point, Joshua is also one of the only people who are there. He's probably one of the older gentlemen in the crowd. We know he's at least probably, 20 when the story in Numbers happens, because they're not sending some 3-year-old into the land of Canaan to go spy out the land. And so it's then been 40 more years. And so everyone else older than him has died, because that was the whole thing of Joshua and Caleb, you guys will be spared, but everyone else has to die off first before you lead the people into Israel, or into the land of Canaan, which I have promised you. And so Joshua and Caleb are now the only people probably with gray hair in the tribes of Israel. And so part of it is, yes, he has the responsibility. He was the understudy of Moses, but it's also now you're the elders now. You are now the older generation. You need to be the one teaching the next generation how to live. You need to be the ones to teach the people of Israel how they are to act. But I did find it interesting the land, or at least the geographical markers of the promised land has changed. Jim, you mentioned last week, because I told you to mention this, how it was the land of
Every order you give.
yeah, the promised land in Genesis was from all the way down into the rivers of Egypt, all the way up to the Euphrates. Well, now it's shrinking. It's now just that northern bit. It's from the wilderness in the south to the Mediterranean to slightly past the Jordan, all the way up to the Euphrates. Well, also, as it should be mentioned, the Israelites never conquer all the way up to the Euphrates until Solomon's kingdom. And so it's one of those moments where you have to sit there and wonder, why did God change his mind? Did God change his mind? I think there's probably two good reasons for why this happens. The first one is God knows Israel is not going to conquer all of the land. Joshua, in the book of Joshua, we even see that. The tribe of Dan is supposed to take over this little small strip in the south. And it is supposed to be the strip where the Palestinians live, not the Palestinians, I've kind of given it away. The Philistines live, and you're going to go in and you're going to destroy the Philistines, and they don't. They end up conquering or being given a city all the way up in the north, and they say, Judah, you go ahead and take care of it, because we are too lazy, we are too afraid, we're not going to be the ones to go conquer this land that has already been promised to us. And so Judah goes in, but the promise is, well, if the tribe that was allotted this land doesn't go and conquer it, you'll never truly hold it. And so, of course, you get the idea of this strip of land in the south, where the Philistines are, becomes a real pain for the Israelites in the history of Israel. Because where do the Philistines come up again and again and again? Every time there's a king, there's a new Philistine trying to conquer them. Saul comes to power because the people look around and say, we need a king because the Philistines are at the door. Well, they look at David and say, well, David and Goliath is Israel versus the Philistines. And it goes back all the way to this point of God probably knows Dan's not going to conquer this land. God sees both beginning and end and everything in between. And so that may be it. I think another part is, and this may take a little bit more of a leap, I think what was being described to Abraham is something greater than just things on a map. I think I'm pretty confident in this because our understanding of the whole world has changed time in, again and again and again. We can think of, well, colonization of the Americas. They used to not think that the Americas were here at all. They knew that there was ocean, and surely if we keep going through the ocean, we'll run into the other side of the things we know. They didn't know that the Americas were here. Going back even further in history, there were civilizations that didn't know that Africa went as far down south as they did. People didn't understand that there's Asia reached all the way out to the east. There wasn't an understanding of where Spain was. They just knew that there was water here and there's land there, and they kind of had a rough estimation of where these rivers were. And so I think it's a sound leap to understand that maybe what God is describing to Abraham, or at least as Abraham would understand it, of this is all of the world. My descendants will rule over not just this strip of land, but they will rule over the world as I know it. And we could get into the argument of, well, there's so much more. Why didn't God just say all of creation? Well, that's a valid point, but
But he couldn't do all of creation because there's far more creation than people knew about.
yeah, there's creation beyond Earth too, right? We see, well, we don't just see, we know that there are planets that are in our solar system. We know that there are celestial beings up there. Is there life up there? Probably not. But it is one of those instances where you have to sit there and say, well, Abraham's not being promised all of that too. He's being promised everything on earth. And so what is all of the earthly creation in Abraham's time? Abraham was from the land around the Euphrates, and he's brought into this land of Israel, and he's been to the rivers of Egypt. Abraham understands the world to be everything from Egypt to the Euphrates, and everything in between. And we can even see, looking into Galatians, which we just came out of conveniently, Paul makes the case of, well, yes, all of the descendants, the heirs of Abraham, will eventually become the rulers of the earth, because guess what? We're all rulers, we're all heirs according to the promise of Abraham. We're all right there under the same covenant. But I am now talking way too long on just these first couple verses. Quickly, Joshua 1 verse 8, David, well, there's a line there of meditate on the law day and night. And David kind of pulls on this imagery in Psalm 1. And I had a question here, we might as well ask it. Why might David be pulling on something from the story of Joshua into his psalms and his praise to God? You look like you wanted to say something, Virginia.
No.
No?
Joshua spoke truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I was kind of also thinking, well, David's inheriting this kingdom, and basically he has to reconquer the land. Saul may be king, but he's allowed the Philistines in way too close to conquering or conquering Israel. He's allowed all these other kingdoms way too in. And you can say, well, it's not all of Saul's fault. Well, sure. But the kingdom of Israel is at its weakest, and he has to reconquer this promised land. And I think there's a part of that. As chapter 1 continues in verses 10 through 18, we see Joshua taking charge of the different tribes and the officers. And God keeps referencing himself as the Lord your God. Why do you think God has to keep reminding Joshua of this? Or do you think maybe this is a note that was included to remind us, the reader?
Both.
Both? Why do you think that is? And
Well, both, because he's reminding the people of Israel that I'm the God, the only God. Forget about the other gods, that
Sure.
that were in the past. And he's trying to teach them that I am God, there is no other God, period.
Sure.
The end. And I mean, that's really what he's doing there.
yeah.
Joshua, was God intention trying to make these people understand that he was God and that they had to worship him? And God had to stay with them because God knew these people. They didn't get the point.
Sure. I mean, I think there are times God has to remind us of who God is.
Right.
And let alone these people who, for better or for worse, all of their ancestors died in the desert. They don't remember the Exodus because they weren't there. They didn't see any of this. It's just what they've been told. And so it kind of goes, again, to this idea of what does it mean to know God? How do we know God? And that leads us into chapter 2. Could I get a volunteer to read all of chapter 2? I know it's a lot, but for the sake of time, just having one person read it may save
I
some time.
should. If I read, I should. Joshua 2.
Yep.
Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from Acacia group to spy secretly, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came to the house of harlot named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told that the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country." So the king of Jericho sent the Bergan, saying, "Bring up the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country." Then the woman took the 2 men and hid them. So she said, "Yes, they came to me, but they did not know where they were from." And it happened, as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men that went out, where the men went, I do not know, and pursued them quickly, for you may overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stack of flax which she had laid in order for the roof, on the roof. Then the men pursued them by the road to Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, and they shut the gate. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof, and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you have fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and only beneath, earth beneath. Now therefore, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house, and give me the true token. And spare my father, my mother, and my brothers, my sister, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death." So the men answered her, "Our lives for yours, in none of you tell this business of ours, and it shall be. And when the Lord has given us a land, that you will deal kindly and truly with you."
All right, let's stop there. So far, the story of Rahab is an interesting one. The author of Joshua makes it kind of clear that Rahab's not well liked in her community. Well, no. She's a sinful woman. Some describe her as a prostitute, a harlot, whatever your version says. She was a woman of the night, if you would. And yet she has this understanding that the guards don't have, that the king of Jericho doesn't have, because they've all heard the story of how this God has led the people of Israel out of Egypt. They've heard of the plagues, they've heard of how they have crossed the Red Sea, how they have been basically camped out waiting for the right time to come into the land of Canaan. And yet they don't jump to this understanding of faith that Rahab does. Rahab, similar to a lot of the people that Jesus sees in his time, of Jesus sees Pharisees and Sadducees and rulers and Roman officials, and they're not the ones quick to confess that, yes, this is Jesus Christ, the Lord, the Messiah we've been waiting for. It's the beggars, it's the blind, it's the women of the night. It's these unsavory kind of characters, and Rahab's that same kind. And it is kind of poetic, I guess, that Rahab ends up being in the line of Jesus, because, again, it would be one of those reminders of it's not the kings that matter. It's these other people that have their low moments, these interesting, their storied pasts. And yet she's the one who has the faith in this God who she's never really prayed to, is probably a safe assumption. She's surrounded by these idols that the culture around her says, no, bow down to these statues, these objects. And yet in her heart of hearts, she is saying, that is not God, though. God is this God of Israel, of Isaac, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think her whole life reflects
Well, she's kind of
something similar to ours.
She's kind of indicative of the Samaritans
Oh,
of that
yes.
time, because she's not from Israel. But she has the faith in God of Israel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So she has that faith that God has been looking for,
Sure.
even from His own people, even, you know.
Yeah.
But at the moment, spur moment, she knew that everybody was gonna die. And she could have thought, what can I do, and she believed.
Sure.
She believed right then, and so she knew, well, if I do this, could you save my family? So more or less, maybe she, at that moment, maybe she found truth.
Sure. And I know that some of us are a little antsy or don't like this reminder of fear in God is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of faith in God. And I'm not saying that fear is, we should all fear God and that's how we start our faith, or that we should only fear God and that's how we believe in Him. Because that's not what the Gospels were about at all. It's not be concerned about how many laws you are doing correct versus how many you're doing incorrectly. It's not any of that. There is a relationship, there is faith, there is love, there's peace and compassion coming from God. But for some people, it's that reminder of God is not some nice, fluffy bunny in the field of flowers. He's sometimes that pit bull that can attack and is a threat and a danger to those who dare trespass.
Well, it's kind of like telling the people, it's kind of like a father to his children.
Yeah.
Okay, obey the father, and if you don't, he's gonna, spank you.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But the fear is the fear that you don't go against God. You
Yeah.
acknowledge Him, you do what He says. And the love comes from following the rules and doing what's right, but you fear His wrath too.
Sure.
I mean, it's a father-child relationship, really.
Yeah, and Rahab has that fear of the Lord,
Yeah.
and she doesn't want to get punished because, yeah, her neighbors may be doing wrong, but she believes in God. She's sinned. She's made her mistakes, but she knows she's probably more tamed than some of the other people of Jericho. She's not
rebellious.
She's not rebellious. She's not offering child sacrifices like some of, not saying Jericho specifically, but a lot of the land of Canaan, we have evidence that they were offering babies up in sacrifices. They were doing these terrible human atrocities to one another. And she was a woman of the night, but that doesn't mean she was.
But she didn't know the law either. So
She wasn't-
She was
Exactly.
somebody who was outside of Israel who didn't know the law
Sure.
that Israel had, but she was still seeking truth.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
It's the same way we see it in the New Testament also, of all these Gentiles that come to know who Christ is and know God. There's some seeking truth. That doesn't mean that they've lived a perfect life up to that point. It doesn't mean that they have memorized the Torah as well as the Pharisees have. But that doesn't mean that they weren't seeking God, that they aren't seeking God. I mean, all of us are Gentiles by the definition given in the Torah. We are unclean, and we shouldn't have a relationship with God, and yet because of how, well, one, Christ opened that door, but also it's one of those moments where because of the nature of us to seek truth, to seek God, and we even see it today. What is science always trying to prove? It's trying to prove some greater power than humanity. It's trying to prove that there's aliens out there who have greater technology than we do. It's trying to prove that there's something else out there, and it's not just us.
But they refuse to acknowledge God.
But they refuse to acknowledge what centuries of people have agreed on. That is, there is something greater. His name is God. He created us. He loves us. He sent his son for us so that we might have a relationship with him. Because what we have done is we have sinned. We have fallen short of the glory of God. We have stumbled. We have all of these flaws in us because we ignored him in the garden. And now God is giving us a way back, and we're still ignoring him. And we're still ignoring the fact. And it's one of those, people will still try and seek higher truth, ignoring the truth that has already been revealed. And so, that's not exactly where I thought this morning was going to go, but I think it was a good point. Part of our conclusion every week, or concluding thoughts, I'll attempt, I didn't have one last week just because it was kind of our introduction, but over these next 11 weeks, I want to spend some time thinking of, or pulling out a story that emphasizes the two paths that we have. Because, again, this whole series is called Choose This Day Who You Will Serve. Or it comes from that passage at the end of Joshua. And I guess the title is actually We Will Serve the Lord. And so, but it's coming back from that passage of Joshua's telling the people, choose this day who you will serve. Well, the whole story of Joshua and Ruth is you get two options. There's always those moments where I could choose to go with God, or I could choose to make something of myself. I think Rahab kind of pulls this out again, because Rahab's given a choice. Choose this God who you don't know will promise to keep you. It's not your God. You haven't ever prayed to this God. You've never worshiped this God, but you're saving his spies. Choose to protect his spies that are surely bringing destruction upon you and your city and your friends and your neighbors and all these people. Choose that path, or choose this path that still will lead to a possibility of destruction. Well, not a possibility, leads to destruction. Jericho will be destroyed, whether the spies are found or not. It's just one of those, okay, Rahab, if you turn in the spies, maybe she gets a little bit more honor or glory from her neighbors. Rahab, you're the savior of Jericho because you've helped us find these spies. Good on you. Or maybe there's some monetary value in this of the king offers some ransom for these spies, and now here's this money, you found the spies. That doesn't stop Joshua from coming and walking around the city and bringing destruction on Jericho. It may make Rahab feel better. It may make Rahab have that greater bit, but she chooses to follow God. This God who she has no relationship with other than she has the starting steps of faith. She has fear of the Lord, and that leads her to know who God is. That leads her to develop a faith.
Well, so did she change her life?
I would assume so. I'm assuming she would become more like an Israelite who knows the law and knows who God is in greater detail because she joins the camp of Israel. The promise when Jericho is destroyed is no one is to live in Jericho or they are cursed. No one is to rebuild anything in Jericho or they are cursed. No one's to rebuild the walls. No one is to rebuild the gates, because each time they do something like that, more and more curses are levied upon them. And of course, David, shortly after David dies, I want to say, someone goes back and rebuilds Jericho. Well, guess what happens to them? They're quickly destroyed, and because curses have been brought upon them, these other nations come in, they destroy them, and it is not a pretty sight. Now, of course, now Jericho is rebuilt again, but they don't have the giant walls and all of that. It's not anything like that. And you could argue, well, why aren't they being struck down for building anywhere near Jericho? Did God stop the curse? Maybe. Could God still be waiting to carry out the curse on these people again? There's also a possibility of that. It's all matter of God's timing. But what we see is Rahab has this faith and understanding because she takes the leap. She says, I'm going to trust in God, even though I don't have a promise that I'll be saved. She understands, I am a sinner. I am a citizen of Jericho. I have been marked for destruction just like everyone else around me. Yet I'm going to choose to follow God in the hope that maybe I'll be saved. And I think sometimes there's people who have those doubts and who are always questioning, even today, and they have that agnostic or atheist view of things of, well, how can I possibly choose God? I fear what would happen if I don't follow God. And I know I don't want to go this way because I'm still going to be marked for destruction. How can I make that leap of faith? Well, Rahab shows you can make that leap of faith, and there is a promise that God has made to you. God's not going to destroy those who are faithful to Him, even those who are outside of the covenant of Abraham, because they're very quickly brought into the covenant of Abraham. Rahab was not an Israelite. She was not born of the tribes of Israel, yet she is very quickly married into those tribes. She becomes an Israelite woman in everything but birth, pretty much. And so by the end of her life, she is someone who's been spared and becomes a member of God's family. Well, we have the same promise because when we take on baptism, when we commit our lives to Christ, we have now been brought into the line of Abraham. Because, again, I'm going to go back to Galatians because we just came out of it. Paul says, Abraham has made us, or not Abraham, Jesus has made us all heirs of Abraham, all heirs to the promise. We don't have to worry about our faith and our salvation because we have now something like this. And you get the agnostic question of, well, what if this is all just a nice story? God has made no promise to you. Well, I forget who said it, but I like it. And so if you know, maybe you can give them credit. It's the story of, maybe it's C.S. Lewis. If you're a Christian and live the Christian life, and there turns out to be no God, you died a good person, at the very least. If you're an agnostic, an atheist, and you die, and there is a God, you have thrown away, you have done, you will end up in hell. You have ended up on the worst possible side. Because sure, there is nothing worse than this idea of being without God. You are now without God for eternity. You have been separated because you did not believe when you had the chance. And I know I'm kind of going off the rails, but time is almost up. And I want us to spend some time, and this is more rhetorical, and think to yourself, how have you ever had to make a choice like Rahab did? Where you don't have a promise of good or bad really happening to you. And you have to face the choice of, do I go with God and the possibility of good will happen to me? Or do I go with the way that promises earthly good, wealth, honor, praise, but will ultimately end in evil? And then also I want us to think, I don't think, Jim, you asked this last week, but over this quarter, I want us to spend some time identifying at least one thing that is keeping us from following God fully. And I want us to think about it every week of what's changed. How can we put away those things that are keeping us away from following God? Those things that really make those choices of, well, should I follow God or should I follow something else? I want us to spend some time thinking about those each week, or at least going home and thinking about those things each week. So that's kind of what I have for this week. does anyone else have any questions for me? If not, again, the bell's about to ring. So,
Thank you.
oh,
It's interesting that Rahab is Jesus is a descendant of Rahab.
sure.
And that means a lot to me. Jesus chose people that weren't Israelites to be lights, and she was definitely a light.
Sure. I mean, we even see it, we'll see it in Ruth again, of out of these two books, it's Rahab and then Naomi that are in the line of Jesus. It has nothing to do with Joshua, it has nothing to do with Caleb, it doesn't have to do with any of these other characters. It's Rahab and Naomi will end up being in the line of Christ. And well, and I guess Boaz, because but it's one of those moments of, we'll bring it up again when we get to the story of Ruth and Naomi. But what we can just start thinking now, because we just talked about Rahab, what about these two women were so impactful to the story of Israel, so impactful to the story of who Christ will become, that we need to maybe take a page out of their book of how we live our lives. But that's all I have for you guys this morning. Thank you.